Welcome back to the Samurai 7 Retrospective, and with the plot and setting addressed, let's start addressing some characters. Now with such a large cast, I was at first a little confused on how to address every character, or whether or not I should. I thought of perhaps making a few composite videos, though I have voted in favor of making more smaller videos dedicated to characters that I feel are deserving at least a little conversation. Obviously, major characters like Gonbei and Katsushiro will get their own full-length episodes, but before we get there, let's warm up with some important supporting characters. Also, quick note, there are some differences between each version of the character between the original movie and this adaptation of it. While those are very interesting, I will save talking about those differences for an episode specifically dedicated to the differences between the source material and this adaptation of it, as I feel that otherwise I would unnecessarily bring up the source material excessively in this video, or any other character videos for that fact. I do know of quite a few small differences, although again I'd like to save that for an episode noting specifically those things. For our first character though, I'd like to look at one of the funnest samurai of Samurai 7, Gorobe. Now, Gorobe appears as early as episode 1, though only really addresses the party in episode 3. He introduces himself to a fleeing Katsushiro and Kikuchiyo as a street performer who loves to make wagers. He challenges Katsushiro to shoot him with a Yumi to see whether or not he'll catch the arrow before it goes through his skull. Now, at first Katsushiro refuses to give in to his goading, although he later gives in and shoots. Gorobe catches the arrow just as it nicks the very top layer of his skull, and in turn decides to follow the two back to their base in the city. It is here that Gorobe, a seeming fan of adventure, decides to join the team, and quickly becomes a friendly voice of authority and veterancy. He helps the group recruit more samurai, and flees with them from the city when the time comes. Along the way, he is always quick to assist his peers in a fight, and dispense friendly and often very good life advice. When the group makes it back to the village, Gorobe helps the villagers prepare for battle, though is ultimately killed from the blast of a gun. As the group finishes off the last giant mech, Gorobe passes in Katsushiro's arms with the line, "You must be joking." And I think that these are very appropriate last words for the man to speak, as above all, he was the voice of enjoying life and living in the moment. He was a man who could be very serious, and was obviously very skilled, but chose not to reflect on the grim nature of life because, in his own words, when life gets hard, you have to laugh. And this sums up Gorobe's presence and views better than anything else. He was a man truly aware of his mortality, and for that reason often sought to laugh at it. As a veteran of many wars and a seemingly older gentleman, it is no doubt that he had seen his fair share of unpleasant things, but instead of growing embittered by this, like say Kanbei, he instead grows to treasure what he does have. He knows that he's only human, but instead of loathing this, he instead chooses to embrace the experience and the fun parts of life. This is evident in everything he does. He uses his skills not to become a mercenary or tradesman after the war, but instead to become a performer for the people. He uses his voice not for harshly criticizing others, but instead to try and lift them up. In fact, he's a sort of foil to Kanbei. While Kanbei comes off as distant and austere, Gorobe is warm and relaxed from the start. This, combined with their mutual respect, is probably why they work so well with each other. This laughing at mortality, though, even factors into Gorobe's fighting style and techniques. While he isn't the most brash samurai, his techniques are often very risky and delicate. Often he does not just dodge projectiles, but instead goes out of the way to try and catch them. In the midst of combat, he seems to have a sort of exhilaration about almost being struck down. When he does decide to dodge blows, he tends to just barely do it, and the scar on his face fascinates him. He has a flair for the dramatic, which serves as an assertion of his life and existence, a sort of taunt to death itself. That's not to say Gorobe is a psychopath or anything. In fact, he's probably the nicest of the samurai, and serves instead as a sort of father figure, or at least helpful friend for many characters. His approachable manner and life experiences make him a great source of knowledge and support for much of the younger cast. As someone who has lived through much, he often serves as a voice of reassurance for those fearing how to live in the future. He is sort of a warm center of the group of the samurai, and his presence helps the group meld together quite well, and harmoniously. This makes his death even more impactful, as he was one of the samurai that helped keep it together the most, as both the old and young respected him and listened to him, and both the old and young treasured his calm and friendly presence. Unfortunately though, Gorobe is mortal, and he is the first of the samurai to be struck down. Looking back on the series, it does do a good job of foreshadowing this, as Gorobe always did seem to have something of a subtle air of doubt in regards to his abilities, and he does have several close calls throughout the series. From the very start, in fact, he kinda marks himself when he almost gets himself killed by Katsushiro's arrow. He just barely catches it as it grazes his forehead. All of this shows that there's more to Gorobe than just his love of life and carefree attitude though, that these kind of mask over a layer of thoughtfulness and subtle seriousness. While he undoubtedly relishes being as close to death as possible in combat, it doesn't seem he enjoys combat itself too much. He is a peaceful man in fact, and sees no honor in getting oneself killed, considering living to be the ultimate victory, the ultimate defiance of death. This probably stems from his past experiences, as he probably saw a lot of carnage in the Great War, and considers himself lucky to be alive. He knows he's lucky too, and perhaps that's why he loves to wager and put on a show. He always seems subtly aware of how dangerous life can get, and for this reason doesn't mind getting dangerous to prove himself. His techniques are quite intense and delicate after all, and he always seems to be on the razor's edge when in combat. He taunts death because he seems aware that it will get him in the end no matter what, and he figures he might as well flex on it while he still can. Because even though he loves the styling of all this, it also seems that there is something of a physical component to this as well. He might be forced to do so due to his age. While his age is never explicitly stated, it does seem that Gorobe is either the oldest or one of the oldest samurai in the group, and age might be starting to blunt his skills. Note how in several fights he is nicked or grazed, when it is obvious, at least to him, that a younger Gorobe would have easily dodged such attacks. Note when he just barely misses catching the arrow that was bound for Katsushiro's leg. This is a man who knows he's capable of great things, but also knows that he is not as capable as he used to be. This seems to make him a bit uneasy on occasion, as he seems subtly aware of his reduced capabilities, though he never lets this discomfort him enough to stop him, as he knows that he still has many capabilities, and it is his passion to use his capabilities while he still can to laugh at the face of mortality. He lives according to his own code of bluster and pizzazz, on his own terms. He knows that death will come for him in some shape or form eventually, and that while this is frightening, it is an inevitability, so he has accepted it enough to try and live on his own terms while he can. He knows that he's slowing down, and while it does create a small air of doubt, it also feeds into his fun and defiant nature in such dangerous circumstances. He knows he could die at any moment, and he doesn't let that stop him. Instead, he lets it fuel him to enjoy life as much as possible, to enjoy what he does have while he does have it, and to wager on as much as possible, so that he, for as long as possible, can continue to laugh at the expense of his own mortality, and so that he can put on the performance of a lifetime.